Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Hello, and welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Paula DuPont, and today's show is going to be a little different than our typical business podcast in that instead of offering several different stories in the news about the business world, we're going to talk about the job market. And more specifically, this is going to offer some tips and resources and ideas on how you can better position yourself if you are in the unfortunate position of looking for work, perhaps because of a layoff or furlough situation due to the coronavirus. So we know now that with the unemployment statistics that there are over 44 million people out of work right now. And what better way to address business news than if we can help get people back to work in the business world. So we're going to have various segments to talk about different aspects of the job market and tools that you can use. And we're also going to have some clips from an interview I did recently with a recruitment specialist and got some insights from him on what he's seeing in the job market. So we have a lot to talk about today, and hopefully this will be helpful for you. So as usual, on the Thursday of a week, the Labor Department reports the latest number of claims for unemployment for the previous week. And that number came out as 1.5 million people. Now, it's not as big as was expected for this week. At least it's not as big as it's been in the last several weeks, which suggests to some that maybe we're rebounding a little bit. And it's possible. But still, when you look collectively at how many people are unemployed, it's still pretty unfortunate. In May, we added 2.5 million positions, while the unemployment rate fell to 13.3%. I believe in April it was something to the effect of 14.7%. So again, it's moving in a better direction, but there are some economists that are expecting that we could surge to 20% and lose roughly 8 million more positions. If that is the case, it suggests that it may take about 3 years to create enough jobs to provide work for every person who is unemployed. In May, there were 21 million people altogether unemployed. So for every U.S. job opening, there's about 4.6 unemployed individuals who could vie for that position. And that's according to the Department of Labor, by the way. So while that does seem rather grim, there are signs to support the idea that we are moving in a better direction. For one thing, we see that as the states are opening up around the country and more businesses are able to reopen, and that people are returning back to their jobs. The fact that the Payroll Protection Program granted money to small businesses with the idea that a heavy percentage of that money had to be spent on payroll to be able to keep people employed. That has just recently changed a little bit, so that instead of requiring 75% of the loan money to go toward payroll, I believe it's down to about 60%. So it still is on the higher side of that loan because the whole idea is to keep people employed, of course. So it had me wondering, overall what it's looking like as businesses are starting to come back and, what the job market looks like. So recently I had a conversation with a talent acquisition specialist, or you could say a recruiter. His name's Chuck Lebinski, and he is a partner and a recruiter with the firm Liberty Personnel, which is just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Chuck's been at this for a long time, and his firm, although they deal with all kinds of jobs in all types of sectors, their primary focus is on IT, engineering, construction and manufacturing, and I think there are probably a couple others. But I talked to Chuck, and I wanted to get a sense from him of what it's been looking like with jobs coming in for his company to pursue. And so I asked him that, and here's what he said.
The first 3 months of the year, we were off to the races. I mean, we were setting records, and we thought this year was going to be amazing. And, of course, the carpet was pulled underneath of us and, and everybody else that's out there, of course. And we thought, our numbers were going to go to almost zero when you hear the unemployment rate out there. But we're actually down about 50%, which is a lot, which is not great, but we're just happy that we're doing half, with unemployment at the rate that it is. But what it's showing us is there's still the same demand as before. The only thing is we have some clients that just can't interview because of, corporate or whoever's making the decisions there just doesn't want to bring people in. But a lot of our manufacturing engineering companies and IT companies, they still have the demand. So what we're seeing and we're hoping is, when we get the green light, and these people can start interviewing again, we could be back to where we were before this all started. We don't know if it's going to be, when that's going to be. We're hoping sooner than later.
I asked Chuck what he thought the impact was of the pandemic shutdown and the fact that we're social distancing and what impact that had on the hiring process. And he had an interesting answer.
We're getting a lot of Zoom and Skype interviews and phone interviews more than we ever seen before. At least they're vetting and screening their first interview that way. Mm-hmm. And then, believe it or not, the people are there. They're meeting face to face, and they're signing their waivers to go on site. And,
really?
A lot of places in manufacturing are taking their temperatures, but we're getting it. They're getting interviews. Everyone's just taking their precautions.
We're going to have some more insights from Chuck as we move through this podcast. For now, we're going to take a brief break for a commercial. And when we come back, we're going to have some job tips. And we're going to look at a lot of different things from LinkedIn and how you can use it more effectively, some free training sites that are available. We're going to talk about resume tips and application, job interviewing type tips. So more on all of that when we come back.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
You know, every time I work on a podcast, which has been largely since this whole pandemic broke out, and the news has just gotten more and more grim in terms of the job market. And it's really frustrating to report on that all the time, but that is news, and that's what's happening in the business world. But I really wanted to have an opportunity to have a more positive message and help people in a way, if I could, to find a kind of a little roadmap for themselves in order to land somewhere and get a good job. And I don't mean to overpromise either, because I'm not saying that this will get you there, but it might offer something that you didn't otherwise know already. And what I did was I did a lot of research, and I looked at what a lot of experts have been saying to try to find some of the common tips that people suggest when you're looking for a new job. So I wanted to share some of those with you in this segment. And then some of the things that are discussed as a tip, we're going to get into a little more in depth in other segments of this podcast. The first one is a big one, and that is about making sure your application is robust and free of mistakes. And again, when it comes to resumes and applications, we're going to talk a lot more about that later. But generally, I mean, it would seem like common sense to make sure that your resume is professional looking and is mistake free. But if you might have been a little sloppy on that before, now is the time to step it up, because of course the job market is so tight, and job seekers and recruiters are using technology to be able to scan resumes, and they're looking for ways to eliminate non-viable candidates when they have such a big pool to draw from. So if there's a mistake on yours, that just puts you at a disadvantage. So even though it's common sense, it's worth saying, right? Secondly, in your approach to looking at jobs and applying for them, you probably have already figured that if you were making a really great salary before, at a time when you're up against a lot of competition, you might not be able to get that exact pay or better. Now you might, and there was something that Chuck talked about in my discussion with him, that if you have a niche type of skill set, that employers may be looking for you more now than they were otherwise, because of the broader job market. So if you have a really specialized skill, you might make better money than you were making before. But for the most part, I think the idea is that you need to keep more of an open mind, and then also look at things beyond just the salary. In other words, what benefits that the employer might offer, like healthcare, retirement benefits. So better to keep an open mind in the beginning of your search. And here's something that I would think most people do know to do, is obviously keeping your application as a file you can easily share online, and putting it up on different job search sites. So your Indeed, LinkedIn, there's plenty of other job sites out there that will deliver alerts to you regularly or as often as you want them to about jobs that might meet your criteria. So if you put your resume on their sites and develop a profile there, it also helps the recruiters to find you maybe before you find them. So something to consider. Networking. Don't forget the value of networking. It's always been considered an essential part of the job search, because 80% of people who get their jobs get them through a network of some sort, a connection. And so it's vitally important that you still network. Now, during the pandemic, of course, it becomes more challenging because we can't go out to those same type of events that we would have otherwise gone to. The alumni group meetings or meetups or trade group meetings, several the typical type of networking events that you'd go to. However, there still are a lot of ways that you can network virtually. LinkedIn is a perfect place for that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But it's not the only way to do it. A lot of it is word of mouth. So it may be, letting people know in your circle of friends or associates that you are looking for work and what you're looking for. And, being very plain about it, because sometimes people don't know if you're asking for help or asking for a tip, or if you're just, basically making conversation. But either way, if you kind of ask people, or if they know someone, that gives them an opportunity to say if they do know someone, or if they know of a job themselves that might be a good tip for you. The other thing is, of course, building your skills. And again, we're going to talk more in depth on that later about the kinds of things that you can take advantage of during this time to increase your skills and build on them. One of the things that I came across somewhere was that skills in Excel is something that's very valued right now. And there's not a lot of people who have that skill and what's more, or are more proficient in it. A lot of people might have a familiarity with Excel, but aren't, as advanced. So that's one of those things where, depending on the kind of work you do, it might be worth exploring what are those skills that are really valued right now. And of course, you may have time right now to pursue them and get better at them. Another tip is keeping an open mind to new opportunities. So even if it's something, a job comes up and it's really not a real clear match to what your skill set is and your experience, if you can look for a way to adapt what you know, or the fundamentals, the core competencies of your skill set, to see how that might apply to this job, it's something worth exploring, and at least be open-minded to it. If you have a set vision of how your career track will go, it becomes a little more difficult when you might have to take a detour. And sometimes those detours end up to being, the place you want to be. And you don't know that unless you actually try and you open yourself up to that thing. And along with that idea comes the idea of freelancing or doing gig work, depending again on the kind of work that you do. For the time being, it might not be a long-term solution, but of course it's something you could consider now. Another tip is to be persistent and apply often, even if it's to the same place. So that might be something, that might be more beneficial to you. So those are just some broader tips. As I said, we're going to get into some of those areas to see how you can specifically really maximize your resume and your LinkedIn profile and some of those other things. So we're going to pause for a moment for another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to get a little more into that.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year, to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
If you're looking for a job, probably the first place that you're going to start to focus your job search efforts is in taking a look at your resume and updating it. So even if that means you were working just a couple weeks ago and your resume reflected your current employer on it already, you still may want to go back and update it and make sure that it reflects the current responsibilities that you had in your job or anything else that might make it a little more different. So that's the first thing. You want to make sure that your most recent work experience is at the top. You want to make sure that your resume is organized, that it's easy to read. And that is something there are a lot of online resources that you could find really just by Googling to see, what's the right kind of template or structure for a resume. And it might vary a little bit depending on the kind of work that you do. I mean, if you're a graphic artist, your resume might look a little different than if you're an accountant. So it's best, rather than me get into what that structure would look like, it's best if you look at that yourself online. But nonetheless, you want to make sure that it looks professional. You might not have to have a professional do it, but you want to make sure that it looks professional, in terms of your margins and the number of fonts that you use, and the font size, how much spacing you have between entries. All those things are important. You want to make sure it's concise, that your resume should only be 1 to 2 pages, and really only 2 pages if you've been working a long time and have a lot of experience to fill in that. And for those who find themselves looking for work, who have had a long career already, it might force you to take some things off of your resume, some of your earlier work. You really have to look at what your target job is and see if that's relevant. I had some tell me that if you're trying to age-proof your resume, and I'm just saying trying because I don't know that you really can, pretty much any information is available online about your identity that anyone could look up and figure out how old you are. But if you want to draw less focus on something you did 20 or 30 years ago, you may not include that on your resume. Unless, of course, if that is the main job that you've been in for the past 20 or 30 years. That's obviously important to have on there. So that's sort of a personal judgment, but it's good if you have a mentor or someone that you could work with who could advise you on that. In terms of if you're someone who has just recently graduated college and you're new to the workforce and you may not have an awful lot of experience to put on there, that's where your cover letter may help to carry your viability for the job a little bit better. You want to put in your cover letter how, enthusiastic you are about the job, and draw on the strengths that you have from whatever types of working relationships you've had, or even volunteer work that you've done that pertains to the job that you're applying for. So you still want to try to use whatever resources might be available from your college that will help you in putting the most pertinent information on there and being able to draw from your school experience to put on there. You want to also make sure that you have someone proofread it, somebody other than you. It's surprising how much you can look at a resume and not see some of the something that might be a glaring error. You get used to seeing it after a while. Sometimes it's just even the way it prints out. It might look different when it's printed than it does on the screen. You want to make sure that it looks the same however it's presented, because it will probably show in various formats. One of the other things that Chuck Lebensky had commented on in the earlier segment, I was referring to my conversation with him. And what he said was probably the biggest piece of advice that he could give to job seekers is making sure to use the right keywords, and to use keywords, period. Some people don't know to do that. So what that means is you want to make sure that on your resume, there's a section on the resume somehow which either lists all the skills that you have or lists the types of industries that you have, that you've worked in. You want to make sure that it aligns with where you want to be, what kind of job you want to have. He gave an example where he was looking for a maintenance manager in the food industry. And he reviewed many resumes, and I guess it initially missed one where an applicant had all the right experience and had the qualifications for the job, and said, and on the resume had that he worked for Campbell's, but nowhere on the resume was the word food, indicating he worked in the food industry. And, it seems kind of counterintuitive that a company like Campbell's, where in your job description it wouldn't have the word food, but you could see where that might happen if it's not, if it's more specifics on what kinds of products or the work that he did at Campbell's. So the search did not pick him up as a candidate because of that those words lacking. So it's important to have keywords on your resume. He said it didn't really matter much where they were in the resume because the technology will pick up on that, but you want to make sure that it is on there. And again, important skills that are seen as very valuable, like Excel for some companies, you want to make sure to have that listed on a section of your resume so that it will stand out. So those are just some of the tips to consider about your resume. As I mentioned before, it's probably important or would be worth your while to do a search online, particularly if you can link it to the industry, the type of job that you want, to find out what some tips are specifically for a resume to connect with that job. So just some things to consider. Keywords seems to be a pretty important one. So we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little more about networking and about what you could say is social networking using LinkedIn.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. from news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Most people are familiar with LinkedIn, or at least have heard of it. But for those who may not be as familiar, it's basically a social media tool designed to do business networking online. So it's not a place where you're going to put the same kind of posts or sentiments that you would put on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or really any other social media, especially not TikTok. Just my little editorial there. But in any case, you probably wouldn't think to do that anyway. So it's a very specific type of social media, and it's proven very effective for people in building their networks, and that will eventually lead to them getting another job. Or in some cases, some people use LinkedIn to find sales leads and connections for partnerships and to help the business that they're in currently. It's also actually an effective way for companies to communicate to their employees and, of course, be able to post the jobs that they have available. Companies are spending more time on their LinkedIn presence to really give people a sense of what it's like to work at that company and what kind of values that company has. So it kind of goes beyond what they might have on their regular company website, where that information would be geared to anyone in the public who's looking at it, from customers to shareholders to suppliers and industry experts and all the different media, all the other audiences that would go to a regular company website. The LinkedIn company site is a little different, and it's tailored to prospective employees. And I can speak to that because I've done a lot of work in that area with helping companies tailor their LinkedIn presence. Nonetheless, in terms of you, the job seeker, LinkedIn is a great tool. And it has a lot that's available for free as a free member of LinkedIn. And then, of course, there's a premium membership, which enables you to do a few more things on the site that you wouldn't ordinarily get to do. One of them, by the way, is having access to their learning program. They have a lot of different courses that you can take online. And with premium membership, you can access any of them. But just some general ideas about taking a fresh look at your LinkedIn presence if you have one, or building one if you don't. So first of all, you have to create a profile. And it pretty much guides you through that process. The LinkedIn tool will help you to go to each section and tell you what to fill out. I mean, it's basically your resume that you're putting up there in pretty much the same order as you would, you put your work experience in pretty much the same order you would have it on your resume. But it breaks things out a little differently too, and enables you to expand a little more if you want. And in this medium, it's perfectly acceptable to have more information. You can also list out separately other certifications that you have, languages that you speak, volunteer work that you do, it really allows for a lot of that. And it also kind of guides you through picking your keywords, because you're going to go through the skills. It has a whole list of skills that you can pick, and that will, to represent your background. And the nice thing is that it will prompt others who visit your page to endorse you if they choose to, or claim that you do have experience in that area. So you can start adding that up, and it can become a little bit competitive, although I'm not sure who's measuring against whom, but it does show you, how much your network is, or how big of a network you have, and you can get those kind of third-party endorsements in a way, which are separate from recommendations. This is another section of the site not a lot of people use, but where you can reach out to someone who you think will be a credible person that will look good if they can write a little testimony about you and your work experience. And in this section, this is one of those things where, it's kind of a give and get. If you ask someone, usually if you're pretty sure they will do it, that they're willing to do it, because you don't really want to put anyone on the spot, but you can ask them for their recommendation and for them to write a testimony in exchange for you writing one for them. Or perhaps you offer that to them first, and then hopefully they would reciprocate or offer to reciprocate. Or, of course, you can just come right out and ask them. So that's really a key thing in terms of setting up your profile and what you look like there online. And speaking of look like, you want to make sure to have as close to a professional picture as you can. Probably not something, casual or from a party, but, obviously in good taste that would represent you well. Another thing a lot of people don't realize about LinkedIn is that you can customize your profile, the URL for your profile, so that if that's something you want to put on your resume, and I would highly recommend doing that once you have your profile filled out and you have a presence on LinkedIn, you might want to take your the URL to your profile page, and if you go to the upper right hand part, and I don't have it in front of me to tell you what that's called, but basically when you go into your settings, there is a tab that will say if you want to customize the name of your profile. It just makes it a little bit easier to put out there, and it's something you could also put on a business card if you have them made up. In addition, there's a background space around your picture. So your picture is pretty much like silhouetted against this blue space. Well, that blue space can be customized. You can do something like a word cloud on there, and there are apps, and LinkedIn may even have one available on there where you can choose different words, and it creates this graphic of all these words that might represent who you are. You really could pretty much do anything there. If you have a logo or a quote, and there are loads of tips and tricks online if you do a search to help you figure out what that space should look like. But the quickest way to figure that out, beyond just leaving it as is looking up other people's pages who are looking for the same type of job that you want, or are in the same type of job that you want. So that's one of the most valuable pieces about LinkedIn. And I'm actually seeing that we do have to do another commercial. So we're going to finish talking about LinkedIn in the next segment.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, well, that came up on me pretty quickly because there obviously is a lot to say about LinkedIn. So, and probably the most important part. So we had to set up the profile. I talked about that and some of the settings that you can adjust and things that you might want to pursue. Now let's just talk about how you use it as a tool to find your new job. So I mentioned too in an earlier segment that 80% of jobs are found because of a connection. And LinkedIn is all about connections, kind of like followers or Facebook friends. It's the currency of LinkedIn is connections. So that's probably the first thing that you want to do is to start building your network, start building your connections. So you can start by people you know or you've met at different job workshops or business meetings or wherever it is that you may have met someone who might possibly be a link, if not directly to a job, but to someone else who might have a job for you. So, and you can't underestimate who that might be because it's it really could be anybody out there, and you just can't go by people in your field or that have the types of jobs that you want. So anyway, you're going to look them up, going to go in the search bar, put their names in, see if they are also already on LinkedIn. And then usually that pops up with something that will allow you to click connect and basically request to connect with them. I believe it also gives you a chance to write a little email or a message to say, remind them who you are, where you may have met, and why you want to connect with them. That's important because some people are very guarded about who they connect with, and if they don't recognize you right away, you might get ignored. I don't think you can get flat out rejected, but being ignored is pretty much the same thing. So you want to just mention, hey, we went to the same university. I thought maybe you might have some advice for me down the line for my career search, something to that effect. I know that's not really sizzly, but in any case, it really just depends on how you know that person, how you came upon their name. If somebody else told you about them, that's the place to bring it up and say, I met so-and-so, and she mentioned that she knew you, and you might be a good contact for me, period. So you want to do that. You want to build your connections. And then at the same time, you can set up your job profile or the job that you're seeking. There's a tab for jobs, and you put in there the search criteria of what kinds of jobs that you're looking for and the geographies that you're interested in. And you will get regular updates in your email with some of those job postings. So it's not even a matter of just visiting the site, but you will also get updates in your email about it, which is a really nice feature. When you look at a job, when you open it, sometimes it will tell you if there are people you are connected with who are also connected with that organization. So you might know someone and you didn't realize that they used to work at that place, or maybe they currently work at that place, or someone you went to school with. You will find out if you have any connections to that job. So that's also an important feature. You can also, as I mentioned before, look up the companies that you might be interested in working for. And if you go to their pages, you'll see what jobs they have open, but you also may get a glimpse of what that company's about, how they were founded, what their values are, what are some of the things that they believe in and are doing in the community. At this time, with the social justice issues that we're all concerned about, this may be a place where you'll see where that company stands on it. And it may be very important to you to know what their position is. Not all companies necessarily would put that on their LinkedIn page. So if you don't find a pertinent statement that goes to those values that you really want to be part of, I wouldn't negate them outright. I think you probably need to do a little more research. Nonetheless, going to their page can give you some indication of what it's like to work there and what the company does beyond what they're producing and their services are. When you go to that page, you'll also have an opportunity to follow, and I would highly recommend that. So if there's a company you're interested in, you should follow them. So then you will get updates in your feed about anything coming from that company, any major announcements that they make, something that may be important to you as you continue to explore jobs there. There's also an opportunity so you can not only follow companies, but you can follow individuals. There are influencers out there that you can, major business tycoons and world leaders and others who have a presence on LinkedIn, and you can follow them as well. So when they post something, you would see it in your feed. Another feature of LinkedIn that I would encourage you to look at is the opportunity to post. So as I said before, you don't want to post the same kinds of things that you would post in other social media, but this is a good place where you can post something that might have a community impact or might be about the company you currently work for. It could be sharing a news article that's pertinent to, you think, the people who are your connections. Because, of course, anytime anyone who is a connection posts something, you see it in your feed, much the way that other social media works. So being able to post material is really good. And, of course, you probably know that pictures get more attention than just text. So if your story has a picture with it, or even if your story is just a picture, that makes for a really good post on LinkedIn. And people see that you're active, that you're using it. A prospective employer knows that you are really literally linked in to the business community and you're trying to stay up on what's happening and you're using this tool. So it kind of speaks to your own interest and passion for finding a new job and also your resourcefulness. The other thing you can also do is write a blog post, and that can be important too. You just want to really carefully pay attention to what you write about. I mean, stay in your wheelhouse, so to speak. So if it's something where you can really bring to light a perspective about something where you have experience in, that's seen more valuable and credible. One last thing about LinkedIn, and believe me, there's a lot more that could be said about LinkedIn, but it's a news story that I just wanted to share. There was an article about a month ago, actually a couple months ago now, that LinkedIn had seen a 55% increase in activity and conversational activity on LinkedIn since the beginning of the pandemic. And at that time, which probably will be set to expire soon, they said they would provide free job postings for essential businesses globally. So LinkedIn was looking to post more jobs about that were available in healthcare, as well as warehousing, supermarkets, freight delivery, nonprofits looking for help in relief roles, in support roles. So LinkedIn was doing more for that, and they were creating an urgent jobs board to give those openings more priority and visibility. So it should be that there should be more opportunities out there because of that, and that could be a good resource for you depending on what your field is. So we are going to take another commercial break, and when we come back in our final segment, we're going to talk about training, online courses, and a couple other quick things before we end this podcast on the job market.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hi, as I said before, we had 2 segments on LinkedIn and probably could do a third on it because there's just a lot of aspects to the tool that I think are meaningful in your job search. And one more thing related to social media, and that is that if you're now finding yourself out in the job market, whether you just graduated from school virtually, and you have my congratulations and my condolences that you didn't get to do it in person. But if you are a recent grad, yay, power to you. And we want to give you every advantage you can have. I just wanted to mention that for you and also for anyone seeking a job, you want to take a look at your social media. And I'm not talking about the LinkedIn social media, but I'm talking about the fun and personal life social media. Because as you know, most of that stuff stays on there, stays online. And you might have posted something about a really great rager that you went to 3 years ago and have forgotten all about it. But the internet doesn't forget. And an employer who is screening potential candidates might not take well to that. So you just want to take a look at that. And I'm not going to give you a lecture or judgment on what's good posting and what's not. What you have to use that judgment. So just consider how it could be perceived by a potential employer. So with that in mind, as I said, in this last segment, we're going to talk about online training because Chuck Lebansky, who I mentioned earlier, he said that really depends on the kind of work you do. but most of the experts that I've looked at their advice for people looking for a job say, it's really a good time, particularly with the lockdown, with us not having as many places to go out to. It's a good time to really work on your skills, to brush them up for the field that you're in, or potentially for a new field that you might be interested in pursuing. So this is the time, and let's face it, time is the one thing that we may have more of right now than normal times. So just wanted to mention that. Now, recently, Walmart was in the news again. This headline probably didn't get as much attention as some of the other ones that have come up over the recent past. But Walmart evidently 2 years ago created a college tuition benefit, a debt-free college tuition benefit for all of their workers in the United States. That means their Sam's Club and their Walmart employees. Altogether, I think that's 1.5 million employees. So that's a lot of people. And this benefit, they used this program called Live Better U. And it features online degree programs at a price of $365 per year or $1 a day for participants. So basically, when they say debt-free, they mean you're not going to have to get a loan to do this. This is just something that you're going to pay this flat $365 for. And just recently, Walmart announced that it was adding in-demand skilled trade and digital skill offerings to the benefit program. So they're going to offer online courses that have 6 certificates in skilled trades, including facilities maintenance, HVAC/refrigeration, and construction. They will also include 19 certificate programs from Cornell and Southern New Hampshire University in digital skills, such as data fluency and decision making. So, and all the employees at Walmart and Sam's can participate in this from the point that they get hired, and that also includes part-time workers. So I thought that was pretty cool that they offer that. I had never heard that before. But if you don't work for Walmart yet or ever, there are a number of other free online virtual education programs that you could take part in. So I have a really, really long list, and I culled it down to 25. And I'm not going to mention all of them. I'm just going to briefly mention some of them, and then maybe what you could do is, rather than try to go to all of these sites, is maybe do a search depending on what kind of skills training that you're interested in, and to see who offers it. One of the top ones that comes up is a company called Coursera, and they're partnered with universities and organizations around the world, and they have a wide variety of topics and perspectives on one searchable database. Khan Academy, and that's Khan Academy. They work with secondary schools, and they do, I believe, a lot around financial education and a lot of different, actually, type learning programs, not just financial. Open Culture online courses is another one. Udemy. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's Udemy, like university/academy, something like that. And they're very similar to Coursera. There's Academic Earth, edX, Allison, iTunes U has free courses. iTunes, of course, is part of the Apple program. It's an app-ready program, so it might mean that you could actually take these classes on your phone. Stanford Online is linked with Stanford University. Harvard Extension as an extension of, obviously, Harvard University. Open Yale courses. That's another one that's similar to Harvard and Stanford's. UC Berkeley, Class Central is another one. MIT, Carnegie Mellon. There's Code Academy, a website dedicated specifically to teaching coding. There's a website called Code, just CODE, also on coding and app writing. University of London Podcasts, and I saw a number of sites that are podcasts as a way to learn. BBC Podcasts is another one. Another one is TED Ed, which is obviously a derivation of the TED Talks and a way to do learning through there. So there's just so many sites to mention that I could go on and on for a whole podcast probably in talking about them all. Again, my advice would be to do a search of what you'd like to learn and then perhaps check some of these out. And probably Coursera, one of the top ones, because that's been mentioned over and over, and that might at least lead to some of the other ones that you'd be interested in. Well, that brings us to a close on this special edition of the GSMC Business News Podcast, one where we focused on the job market, and hopefully you got something today that you can use and apply towards your job search, and hopefully to what the latest information and indicators are saying about us recovering sooner and the job market coming back is true. I wish you all the luck. So we are going to conclude today's podcast, and I would say that if you have any questions about some of the material that I mentioned, you could always post a comment on either our Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook accounts and leave a message to that effect, and then we'll get that information out to you. So I want to thank you for joining me today and look forward to talking to you again the next time at the GSMC Business News Podcast. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.